Dallas Willard says this: human life essentially involves meaning. Meaning's not a luxury for us. It's a kind of spiritual oxygen, we might say, that enables our souls to live. Have you ever kind of thought about this whole thing of meaning and value? Like, you look around at, like, have you ever gone into an art museum and seen a piece of art that was listed for thousands and thousands and you don't see it at all?
Actually, I've actually got some examples of this.
Okay, let's see.
Yeah. Throw up the first art picture. This is one of the most expensive pieces of art ever sold. It's called Number 6, also known as Violet, Green, and Red. It was made by Mark Rothko in 1951, and it sold in 2014 for $186 million.
There you go.
$186 million. Do another one for me. This one was made this year by my friend John Thorpe on my iPad.
That looks like a coffee bean.
Yeah, it is.
Hey,
It's currently up for auction.
I'm an artist.
But what's funny is this one means more to me because my friend drew it on my iPad, right? Like, there's actually meaning to it, and I don't know, I might be willing to buy it. It's kind of cute. But the other ones, I mean, you think about how much money went into that last painting. It's funny, the description for that painting before was, without subject matter and displaying only 3 colors, this painting adheres to Rothko's principle of using art to explore deep concepts of mortality and spirituality. Yeah, sure it does. Yeah, that's what I always say too.
You know, I remember if you were around back a few years ago, we used to have an auction every year to help our school, Cross Hill Christian School. We'd have this spring auction, and we would fill the gym over here with a couple hundred people, and we would go out and procure all kinds of stuff. We'd have, just packages in town and vacation homes and things like that. And we would have a vacation like a week over in Black Butte or a week in a condo in Hawaii, and people would bid on it. And then they had these plates, these clay plates that were painted and had all the kindergarten kids' thumbprints on the plate. People would go crazy over the plates. We would sell a plate, I'm not kidding, if you were there, for some of the plates, $3,000-$4,000, more than the Hawaii vacation home, right? And some of you people actually still have those plates on your wall, Mrs. Ernst, right? And so it's like this, but what is going on there? Something is going on. Something has meaning beyond just the physical face value of paint or texture or canvas or whatever. What is giving it that deep meaning? What's up with that?
And the things that have the most meaning for us tend to carry the highest price as well. You know, if what's most meaningful to me is security, then I'm willing to pay a high price to make sure I'm secure and safe. And this whole thing of meaning is like an invisible GPS underneath all of our systems. As we go through life, we tend to gravitate towards those things that mean the most. But the question is, how can we know what has the most meaning? Or can we decide, like these art things, do we just decide they have meaning, or do they intrinsically have meaning? And that brings us to this idea of existentialism.
Some friends of mine had a home in Hawaii there, just below the flow of that volcano. And they'd been watching that flow very carefully, and then you watched about a week and a half ago, Fissure 8 opened up, and a flow of lava 30 feet deep flowed down through this valley and consumed their home in a matter of minutes. Just like that. Sometimes the way this GPS thing we're talking about is, what does your heart gravitate towards when everything either comes apart or goes still? Sometimes when you're moving through the day, you're fast and you're making decisions, but if there was a 30-foot flow of lava coming towards your home, and you could run in and you have 5 minutes to grab, you're going to find out what's meaningful to you. If your family's in that home, if the kids are downstairs asleep, you're going to find out really quickly when you're faced with that kind of circumstance. What is really valuable to me? I see this oftentimes at the end of a life, as I'm in a hospital room and a man or woman is facing the last few minutes of their life. And there's only a few things they can grab right now. And it's never the car. It's never the car. It's never the tennis trophies. It's always something that has deeper substance. And so this word existentialism that Ray mentioned is this tendency in our world to attach meaning to only what is relative to me, only what I can experience. Now, before we go there, listen to what the psalmist said in Psalm 8. David, this man I mentioned at the beginning, this writer, this author, this poet, musician, is seated outside somewhere, obviously looking up in the middle of the night, and he writes these words in Psalm 8. I'd love for us to read these together. Let's do this together. When I look at the heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars which you have set in place. What is man that you're mindful of him, and the son of man that you care for him? You've made him a little lower than the heavenly beings, and you've crowned him with glory and honor. You've given him dominion over the works of your hands, and you've put all things under his feet. You hear what's going on there? This man, this author, this creator, this artist, is all of a sudden has put things in perspective. He's looking up at a vast sky, and then he's looking down at his puny little self, but he's in a state of wonder. He's not self-flagellating. He's not saying, I'm just a worm. But he's actually got it all in order. Lord, how majestic is your name. When I consider the heavens, who am I? But I'm not a worm. I'm actually just made by you a little lower than the angels. He's saying, I have significance because of you. In light of who you are, I have significance.
The problem is that with our culture currently, the existentialism piece is that we get to create our own meaning for things. And everyone's kind of running around the earth with their own stories of what's important. And there's this YouTube channel I follow that's kind of like the Bible Project for science. They do these really cool animations and explain, what's behind science and what the universe is made of and that kind of thing. And they started to realize people were freaking out every time they watch these videos. They just have these existential crises because they're like, what is my life in comparison to all this stuff? And so they basically said, hey, let's do a video that explains a little bit of our philosophy on life. And they called it optimistic nihilism. Which in other words is, hey, there is no God, there is no meaning, there is no true meaning to life, and so we're all going to die in a big heat death one day because of the sun. So in the meantime, even though it'll all mean nothing, let's at least be optimistic about the time that we have, right? And the way they described it is, if your life is all we get to experience, then it's the only thing that matters. If the universe has no principles, the only principles relevant are the ones we decide on. If the universe has no purpose, then we get to dictate what its purpose is. If this is our one shot at life, there is no reason not to have fun and live as happily as possible. Do the things that make you feel good. You get to decide whatever this means for you.
What you have there is a description of our current culture. You get to decide what is meaningful for you. You get to decide. And so what you have is this culture that's confused, I think, and it's insecure because my meaning now is kind of out there floating. Someone said modern man has both feet planted firmly in midair. Because now my value, or the meaning attached to that value, maybe is connected to what you're willing to pay for me, what you're willing to decide about me, whether you like me, whether my body is in the right shape or form right now, whether I live on the right side of town, whether I make the right kind of money, whether I've had the right kind of accomplishments. You see what I'm saying? It becomes this relative thing, this thing that's, again, floating in midair. Let me give you just a definition, just a basic Webster's definition of existentialism, and watch what he says. Existentialism is the idea that each individual, through their own consciousness, not society or religion, the individual is solely responsible for creating their own values and then determining a meaning to life and then living it passionately and sincerely. I'm not sure that that's sustainable. I think that what the psalmist saw out there was not something a figment of his imagination, but what the psalmist was out there with nothing but nature in front of him. What he saw was this grandeur of a creating God. And then, like I said earlier, he saw himself in this same perspective. So when he saw the greatness of God, the size of God, if you will, all of a sudden he felt dwarfed in comparison. But it's interesting, different than all the other gods of the nations around them, because the other gods of the nations in that time period really wanted you to feel insignificant. They wanted you to feel scared. They wanted you to feel intimidated because they had their thumb on you. They wanted you to fear them in a bad way so that you could continue to bring your sacrifice and appease. They wanted you to live in a state of paranoia and feel small. And yet the God of David says, no, yes, you're not me. I'll agree with you there. You're not God, but you're made in my image. And something about you bears my thumbprint, and therefore you are significant. Isn't it interesting when Jesus had that encounter when someone brought a coin to him and said, hey, should we pay taxes to Caesar? What did Jesus say? He asked the question, whose image is on that coin? They looked at it, Caesar's. That belongs to Caesar. Whose image is on you? Not Caesar's. God's image is on you. You belong to God. That's why every human being has value and worth, regardless of their status in life. That's something that's immovable and untouchable by a changing world.
There's basically 2 points we want to talk about tonight, or this morning. Sorry, it's been a long weekend.
It has been.
The first one is the gospel anchors our lives to a truth beyond our feelings and circumstances. The universe is not empty. We're not alone. There really is a God who loves and cares for us. And how can we know that that's true? In Romans 1, Paul kind of throws this out there. He says, for what can be known about God is plain to us all because God has shown it to us. How? For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world in the things that have been made, so we are without excuse. He's using a very simple argument of like, hey, look around you. Where do you think all this stuff came from, right? In our own experiences, everything that we interact with and see comes from something, from somebody or somewhere. Everything has a cause, has a beginning, whether it's this table or the coffee or even the words that I'm speaking come from me. It's like there's something about when you look at this world, you go, there has to be a creator who put all this into existence. Someone who has eternal power and divine nature outside of us that can speak this into existence. And I just want to show, just for the gravity of, I think what's amazing to me is, in the Bible, they only had so much information about their world, right? And yet they could see God's glory in it all. Mm. And we know so much more now. And for some reason it makes people cold, but really it truly is awe-inspiring. This picture of the Andromeda Galaxy is the largest and sharpest image ever taken by NASA. This is a real photograph of a galaxy. And you know how we have a sun in our solar system, right? That's one star. This one has 100 million stars stretching across 40,000 light years. And if we zoom in on just this little, see that little speck right there? Let's zoom in on that. Yeah, it's insane. And what's crazy is that one galaxy. So this one galaxy holding these 100 million stars is only one galaxy of an estimated 100 billion galaxies. And on one hand, I went through this existential crisis in high school where I'm like, what is life? This is crazy. Like, what is a car payment in light of this? It just kind of blew my mind. And on one hand, it was like, I seem so small and insignificant. It's like, how do you even know there's someone? But what's amazing is, it's like the psalmist wrote. He said, when I look at your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars, which you have set in place, what is man that you are mindful of him, right? For some reason, it's a mystery to me, but even though God can make all of this incredible stuff and keep it all moving in motion, by the way, he somehow made us in his image and cares for us deeply and personally. It actually makes us more significant and not less. It makes us more significant.
The option to a designer God, the option to a God who has designed and thought us up and maintains us, is really just random chance and matter. We're just a big bag of chemicals, and everyone is, as the writer said, dancing to their own DNA. Next week, we're going to do a piece on justice, on how do we know what's right and what's wrong? What is morality and where does it come from? But listen to the words of the psalmist in Psalm 139 as he writes these words, as he reflects on the creator God and the designer God, and as he reflects on his own life. He says, Lord, where can I go from your spirit? Where can I get away from your presence? If I go up to the heavens, you are there. If I make my bed in the depths, you are there. If I rise on the wings of the dawn, if I settle on the far side of the sea, even there your hand will guide me, your right hand will hold me fast. Do you hear the word there that kind of runs through that is involvement? Is involvement, that the God who created me is not just some distant deity who has nothing to do with me. He's okay, well, that's kind of what a lot of our forefathers were. The founders of our country were deists. They were very different than evangelical Christians or fundamental Christians. They believed in God, but they believed in him as an impersonal force. That he created the world and then he sort of stepped back and said, well, I'm going to let it go. I'll be back in a few thousand years to clean up the mess. And yet, the writer here describes this God, you know everywhere I go. I used to think that was my mom, just describing my mom. I couldn't hose my mom, right? She just had this instinct of, you're not telling me the truth, right? You know what I'm talking about. And yet he's describing this God who is behind the Andromeda strain there, but who is also intimately involved. So for us, that's a hard thing for us to wrap our minds around.
I would even say, is that how we see God? When I think of who God is he that big? Because I think the less I read my Bible and the less I pray, the more God in my mind kind of shrinks down to something that he's really not. And then I'm like, why should I serve that God? It's like, I shouldn't. That's not who God really is, right? He's bigger than my own imagination about him. If I'm not careful, it'll just kind of shrink down to some kind of, impersonal roommate who's never around and leaves a mess or something. And it's like, is he ever going to show up and clean up after him? I just get I'll have a word with him. But because if we devalue who God truly is, if we don't see him for who he truly is, then we have less reason to want to honor him, first of all. And then we have less reason to want to honor his other creations as well.
For many in the room here this morning, maybe a few of you, the whole idea of a personal God is a new concept for you. Because all that you've ever known is this idea of a God who's to be feared or a God who is distant. And oftentimes that's an echo of your own past experience in a family of origin. Your image of God is an echo of what you were raised in your family of origin. And so to believe what we're saying here, to believe what God says, that you really know me, you know when I get up and when I lie down, you know when I come in and you know the hairs on my head. Jesus said he knows how many hairs are on my head. For us, it's just a hard thing to wrap our minds around, but every once in a while you catch glimpses of it. It's like we have amnesia. We have God amnesia. We've forgotten who we are. Many writers over the years have described this, probably no one better than C.S. Lewis. He writes these words, the books or the music in which we thought the beauty was located will betray us if we trust to them. It was not in them, it only came through them. And what came through them was longing. We've all experienced this moment of something came into our life, a song, a sunset, a human touch, something. And there's this longing that was stirred in us. Everybody, I think, has experienced that. And it was something that was like an echo, bigger than anything we could describe or wrap our minds around. He said, these things, the beauty, the memory of our own past, are good images of what we really desire. But if they are mistaken for the thing itself, they will turn into dumb idols, breaking the hearts of their worshipers. Hold that thought with me. What we find oftentimes in our lives when we forget who God is to us, we find ourselves searching in our past for things where we remembered our heart was alive. So we go back to old flames in high school. We find them on Facebook. Oh, I just remember how in love we were. But if you really went back there, what you'd really discover is how dysfunctional we really were. But you're not after her or him. You see, you're not actually after her or him. You're after it. You're after some sense of transcendence. You're after some sense of this mysterious thing called love. And you thought it was there, but that was just an echo. That's what C.S. Lewis is saying. And if you're not careful, you look for the thing and it becomes a dumb idol. It can't speak. It can't provide. He said, for they are not the thing itself. They are only the scent of a flower we have not yet found, the echo of a tune we have not yet heard, and news from a country we've not yet visited. You think I'm trying to weave a spell? Perhaps I am, but remember your fairy tales. Spells are used for breaking enchantments as well as for inducing them. The gospel is a love story. It's a love story. It's not a scientific formula. All that scientific formula is, it's meant to point you to the love story, the author of the story. Jeremiah would call his people to account who had forgotten God. And they'd gone chasing after dumb idols. They'd gone trusting after idols that couldn't speak or save. And he writes these words as he speaks to the leaders of the nation who are about to go into captivity because of their amnesia. From the least to the greatest, all are greedy for gain. Prophets and priests all practice deceit. They dress the wound of my people as if it's not serious. They say peace and peace when there is no peace. Are they not ashamed of their detestable conduct? They have no shame, not even to blush. And they will fall among the fallen. They will be brought down when I punish them, says the Lord. This is what the Lord says. Listen to the word of the Lord to the people there. Stand at the crossroads and look and ask for the ancient paths. Ask where the good way is and walk in it, and you'll find rest for your souls. The modern is out here looking for some new thing. The modern man is out here. He's divorced himself from the ancient paths, and now he's out looking for something that will give him meaning. And God says, no, go back to the crossroads and ask. That's where the peace is. That's where the rest is for your souls.
One of these ancient paths is to honor one another. You know, as we honor God for who he really is, it empowers us to see his creation for what it really is, for how everyone bears the image of God in some way. And we in turn need to honor each other. And that's our second point. The gospel empowers us to live consistently as a people of honor. Because again, it's one thing to believe in God and to love God in our own, our own bedroom. But as we live in the public square, how are people going to interact with that? And it's going to be through, we honor one another. But again, I don't know about you, but we're not exactly the most honorable culture right now with each other. And honestly, a lot of it comes through comedy. I was saying this last night. This isn't necessarily biblical, it's just an opinion, so you can feel free to just push me over at any point.
No, you're good.
But all forms of comedy involve some form of disrespect. And so we may not always just say disrespectful things straight out, but we end up trying to use comedy as a way to hurt people. But then everyone laughs about it because we all know you're that person we don't like, and isn't that funny? And we can all agree. But it's a very toxic environment that we have to be careful not to fall into.
I thought it was interesting if you watch the news this week, and I told you not to do this, but Sarah Huckabee gets kicked out of a restaurant in Washington, D.C., right? I don't know if you saw this. She was actually asked by the owner. The owner shows up, found out she was eating dinner there, and came in and asked her and her entire party to just leave. And when she asked why, she said, the owner of the restaurant said, I'm doing this for on a moral basis. She didn't say what that was. She said, my moral convictions compel me to ask you to leave my restaurant. We're going to come with us next week. But I just think that's interesting that you can pull the morality card when it suits you. You can get angry when it's your agenda. You can be kind of gnarly when you feel like you have a moral leg to stand on, right? But where in the world does that come from? If it doesn't come from something outside of ourselves, you have to admit that it's coming from inside of you. And it could be biased, possibly. Could be biased. It could be coming from anger or frustration or vengeance or some other kind of bias. And this thing of being a culture, a people of honor. Man, you guys, the gospel allows us to attach value to everything and everyone, not because it suits us or because it's fashionable, but because it's outside of us. Have you ever watched the birth of your baby or your grandson or your granddaughter or whatever, and when you look at that little baby, there's this incredible gush of emotion. In that moment, when that baby is handed to you at a few minutes or a few hours old, as a father or a mother or a grandparent, you'd give your life for that baby. Would you not just, Michael, just give your life for that baby? And what, that baby has not gotten an A on their report card. That baby has not washed your car or cleaned your garage or done, worked for the United Way or done some great thing. That baby has not done anything. That baby you would die for because of who it is. Because of the mark on that baby. That's my image. Looks just like Dad. Poor thing. Psalm 139, the same writer says, "You created my innermost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made." Don't miss the correlation between worship and significance. I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. I believe that if your self-image is stunted, so will your worship be. If you believe you are an accident, then you worship a God of impersonal accidents. You may believe in him, but you won't draw near and sit in that God's lap. Think about that. He says, "My frame was not hidden when I was made in the secret place, when I was woven together in the depths of the earth. Your eyes saw my unformed body. And all my days were ordained for me, written in your book before one of them even came to be. How precious are your thoughts to me, O God. How vast is the sum of them. Were I to count them, they would outnumber the grains of the sand. When I am awake, I'm still with you." Doesn't it stand to reason that if we devalue God, we are going to end up devaluing the people in our lives? See, when we move to a place of dishonor, and we're baited to dishonor, like the comedy thing, we're baited all the time. For example, some of you on Father's Day last week, that was probably a painful day for many because you look back at your experience with your father and you saw nothing but pain. And so the bait, like the sons of Noah, is to dishonor Dad and tell the whole world Dad's naked and drunk. But in doing that, you end up dishonoring yourself because you're declaring, "I'm not worthy of a good father." You see what I'm saying? That when we honor other people, we're actually enriching our own lives by recognizing the wealth that is in our lives.
We can have the worship team come back up. You know what? How far does this go in terms of honoring one another? There's this passage in 1 Peter 2 I was reading that just really jumped out for me for this weekend in regards to this. And when you read it on its own, out of context, you go, "This is the craziest thing I've ever heard. Why would I ever do that?" It's about as countercultural as you can get. It says, "Be subject for the Lord's sake to every human institution, whether it be to the emperor as supreme or to governors as sent by him to punish those who do evil and to praise those who do good. For this is the will of God." We're always asking, what's the will of God for my life, right? Well, buckle up. It's rare you get this kind of a moment. Like, okay, this is the will of God. What is it? That by doing good, you should put to silence the ignorance of foolish people. Do you ever encounter a foolish person on TV that you just want to tell off? Or if I ever got together with that, here God's saying, you're going to do that by doing good. Live as people who are free, not using your freedom as a cover-up for evil, but living as servants of God. Honor everyone. Love the brotherhood. Fear God. Honor the emperor. And then he says, "Servants, be subject to your masters with all respect, not only to the good and gentle masters, but also to the unjust masters." We like being good to the good people, right? Because you're good, I'm good, everything's better, life's awesome. But here there's something, you're like, what do you mean? He says, "For this is a gracious thing. When mindful of God, one endures sorrows while suffering unjustly." And the key word there, the key phrase is mindful of God. Without the image of God, it doesn't seem like this is for anything, but the reality is enduring sorrow while suffering unjustly. If there's something culture doesn't want us to do, it's A, to suffer, and B, to suffer unjustly. Those are not valuable things or meaningful things to a godless world. He goes on to say, "For what credit is it if, when you sin and are beaten for it, you endure? But if when you do good and suffer for it, you endure, this is a gracious thing in the sight of God. For to this you have been called, because Christ also suffered for you, leaving you an example so that you might follow in his steps. Even though Jesus committed no sin, neither was deceit found in his mouth. When he was reviled, he did not revile in return. And when he suffered, he did not threaten, but continued entrusting himself to the one who judges justly." See, it's one thing to not believe in God. It's another thing to believe there's a God out there, but it's a whole nother ballgame to realize the truth that God came to earth, perfect as he was, as a human being like you and I, and to suffer for our sake, in order to suffer to renew a relationship with him. And so as we live life in the public square of honoring one another, even to the point of suffering for doing good, it's gonna send a really strong message to people where they go, why would you do this? What value and meaning is it in this? And they're gonna see God's love for them in the way that God loves you. But if you don't have that connection with how much God loves you, it's just not gonna flow outwards to those around us. Again, I guess I just want to stress, we're not saying, hey, just do better at suffering for people. It really is a relational aspect of, I need to be close with God so that I start to behave like Jesus would when he was here for me.
As we finish this morning, we're going to share communion as we often do. And as you head towards the elements to pick them up, I don't know about you, but I can get in a rut and a routine of just picking up a piece of bread and a cup of juice, downing it. I just pray you could pick it up this morning in a personal way. That somehow that is connected to a story that began 2,000 years ago when a real Jew, a God man, was beaten and whipped and crucified, looking down the corridor of time to you and I this morning. When we pick up, we'll hold the elements together, and then we'll take when everyone is served.